The silence in the Ural Mountains that night was broken only by the biting wind, and then screams. 9 hikers, experienced and well-prepared, vanished into the vast, unforgiving snow. Weeks later, their bodies were found in circumstances so bizarre, so terrifying, that they continue to defy rational explanation. Join us as we unravel the chilling mysteries of the Dyatlov Pass Incident, a historical enigma that still sends shivers down the spine. January 27th, 1959. 10 young souls set out from Sverdlovsk, now known as Yekaterinburg, into the frozen wilderness of the northern Ural Mountains. They were students and graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, strong, intelligent, experienced winter hikers. Their leader, 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, had meticulously planned this expedition to reach Otorten Mountain, a journey that would earn them the highest certification in Soviet mountaineering. One member, Yuri Yudin, turned back early due to illness. He would be the only survivor. The group's planned return date was February 12th. When that date came and went with no word, families grew concerned. By February 20th, when the hikers still hadn't returned, search parties were finally dispatched into the brutal Ural winter. What they found would become one of history's most disturbing unsolved mysteries. On February 26, 1959, search parties discovered the expedition's tent on the eastern slope of Kolatsiakal, a name that translates from the indigenous Mansi language as Dead Mountain. But this wasn't an intact campsite waiting for its owners to return. The tent had been torn open, slashed, cut from the inside. Imagine the searchers' confusion as they approached. The tent was still partially standing, still anchored, covered in snow. Nothing appeared to have attacked it from the outside. No claw marks, no bullet holes, no avalanche damage. But when they looked inside, everything was still there. Food, warm clothing, boots, even money. All abandoned. The hikers had left behind their only shelter in temperatures that would plummet to minus 25 to 30 degrees Celsius, and they had cut their way out through the fabric itself, as if something inside the tent was so terrifying, so immediately threatening, that they couldn't even take the few seconds needed to unlace the entrance. The scene was wrong. All wrong. 9 experienced hikers. People who understood the mountains, who knew that leaving shelter in those conditions meant almost certain death, had fled into the night wearing only their underwear and thin sleeping clothes. Some wore only a single sock. One was barefoot. The footprints told a story that made no sense. 8 or 9 sets of tracks, investigators couldn't be certain, led away from the tent in an orderly fashion, not running in panic in different directions, not scattered by chaos. They walked in a deliberate line heading down the slope toward the tree line roughly 1,500 meters away. But there were no other prints, no footprints of an attacker, no animal tracks, no evidence of another human presence. What could make experienced mountaineers abandon their only chance of survival so calmly, yet so desperately? The first 2 bodies were discovered on February 27th near the forest edge, at the remnants of a small fire. Yuri Krivonishenko and Yuri Doroshenko lay beneath a large cedar tree, both dressed only in their underwear. Their hands were burned, their fingers scraped raw, evidence they had desperately tried to climb the cedar tree, breaking branches up to 5 meters high. But why? What were they looking for, or looking at? Investigators found the next body between the cedar and the tent, Igor Dyatlov himself, lying face up in the snow, frozen in position as if he had been trying to crawl back to the camp. 2 more bodies were found nearby, Rustem Slobodin and Zenaida Kolmogorova. All 3 appeared to have died trying to return to the tent, to the shelter they had so frantically abandoned. 5 bodies, 5 deaths from hypothermia. Strange, but perhaps explainable. But the horror had only just begun. It took another 2 months to find the remaining 4 hikers. On May 4th, deep beneath 4 meters of snow in a ravine, searchers uncovered what would transform this tragedy into an enduring nightmare. The bodies of Ludmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolevatov, Nikolai Thibault Brignol, and Alexander Zolotaryov were found together, more properly dressed than the others. They wore clothes that had been taken from the bodies of their dead friends. Dubinina wore Krivonishenko's pants. Zolotaryov wore Dubinina's faux fur coat and hat, but these weren't deaths from hypothermia. The autopsy reports revealed injuries that medical examiners could only describe as catastrophic. Dubinina's chest had been crushed with such force that her ribs had fractured. The medical examiner compared the damage to that of a high-speed car crash, but there were no external wounds, no bruising, no signs of a struggle or beating. The same was true for Zolotaryov and Thibaut Brignol. Massive internal trauma, fractured skulls, broken ribs, but almost no external injuries. The examining physician stated the force required would be equivalent to a car crash, yet there were no soft tissue damage, no scratches, no contusions you would expect from such violence. And then, the detail that transformed confusion into genuine horror. Dubinina's tongue was missing, not cut, not torn in a struggle, simply gone, along with her eyes, part of her facial tissue, and a section of her skull. Some of the clothing showed elevated levels of radiation. The case file concluded the hikers died from a compelling unknown force. Let's consider what the evidence tells us, and what it doesn't. The footprints from the tent were calm, measured, walking in single file, not the panicked sprint you'd expect from people fleeing in terror. The hikers left together, suggesting they all saw or experienced the same threat simultaneously. Yet there was no evidence of an external attack at the tent. No avalanche. The tent was still standing, the slope above undisturbed. No animal attacks, no tracks, no blood, no defensive wounds, no other human presence, no additional footprints in any direction. The tent was cut from the inside, meaning whatever terrified them wasn't trying to get in. They were trying to get out. Some theories point to infrasound, low-frequency wind phenomena that can cause panic, dread, and even hallucinations. The Ural Mountains are known for this effect, but could infrasound cause 9 experienced hikers to simultaneously flee, orderly yet desperately, into certain death? Others point to military involvement. The area was used for weapons testing, and that elevated radiation on the clothing. But why would the Soviet military slaughter their own citizens, then allow an investigation that would expose the evidence? The indigenous Mansi people speak of that mountain with fear, calling it a sacred place where the dead roam. Local folklore tells of strange lights in the sky, of spirits that punish those who trespass. And indeed, another group of hikers reported seeing strange glowing orbs in the sky that night, roughly 50 kilometers away. The massive internal injuries with no external wounds suggest an immense, instantaneous force applied evenly across the body, like a shockwave, or intense pressure change. The missing soft tissue from Dubinina's face could be explained by decomposition in running water. The ravine was near a stream, but the tongue, the eyes, scavengers might explain it. But the evidence wasn't conclusive. The radiation might have come from camping lanterns of the era which used thorium, or from something else entirely. Every answer raises 3 new questions. In 1959, Soviet authorities closed the case, declaring the hikers died from a compelling unknown force. The area was declared off-limits to hikers and adventurers for 3 years. In 2019, 60 years after the tragedy, Russian authorities reopened the investigation. Their conclusion? An avalanche, followed by panic. But that explanation requires us to ignore the intact tent, the orderly footprints, the missing external injuries, the bizarre behavior of experienced mountaineers. It requires us to accept that 9 people who understood the mountains better than most of us ever will would rather freeze to death than simply re-enter their partially standing tent. The Dyatlov Pass Incident endures not because we lack theories, but because every theory requires us to ignore some piece of evidence. Something doesn't fit. Something can't be explained. On that night in February 1959, 9 people experienced something on Dead Mountain, something so overwhelming, so immediately terrifying, that death in the freezing darkness seemed preferable to staying in their tent. What did they see when they looked up at that mountain? What did they hear in the howling wind? What force could crush a human chest like a car accident without leaving a mark? We may never know, but somewhere in the Ural Mountains, where the wind still howls through the pass now named for Igor Dyatlov, the answer remains buried in the snow, along with the truth about what happened on Dead Mountain. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Some answers are more terrifying than the questions. If this story left you with chills, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history's darkest mysteries. Drop a comment below. What do you think happened to the Dyatlov group? Do you believe in the official explanation, or is there something more sinister lurking in those mountains? Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, some places are called Dead Mountain for a reason.